So, Ian, I mean, there is so much good news about, and it's amazing when the death rate is high. That is all leading the news. We've had the death rate absolutely plummeting in recent weeks and recent months. We've now got the lowest death rate in Europe per million, below Denmark and Norway, for goodness sake. We're also, as I just mentioned, UCL is saying that we will pass herd immunity status at 73% of the population having antibody protection. And yet the government's talking about vaccine passports, talking about not easing lockdown any sooner than the dates they've already laid out. People not being allowed to go into a pub. There's question marks last night about whether you'd be allowed to go into pay on a credit card or go to the toilet in the pub when you're sitting outdoors next Monday. And still talk from SAGE and Public Health England of us wearing masks and social distancing for time immemorial. What is the route out of this if it isn't the vaccine rollout?
Morning, Julie. Morning. Well, I agree with you in the sense that we've made huge strides. The government should take the plaudits for having gambled early last year, bought the vaccines, invested in the AstraZeneca vaccine, now to be made available at cost to the developing world. These are huge strides, and huge strides for us nationally. So, yeah, we should be reaping the benefits now of having gone early. But I think the announcement yesterday tells you something very important about what's going on, I think, within government circles. There's no question in my mind now that the scientists, I think, certainly those close to advising the Prime Minister and co, are incredibly cautious now. They, I think, were scarred by last year when it's now becoming clear that they didn't quite understand what was going on with the coronavirus, and they advised the government. And that advice, it turns out, wasn't correct. That's not their fault. It's the lack of knowledge at the time of coronavirus. I think now, if you fast forward to where we are now, I think they are, I suspect, petrified about having the accusation later in the year that they got this advice wrong as well. So caution is where they are. And I thought the announcement yesterday, I think was ridiculous. I do not understand what they were saying. They were trying to say that there was no risk or minimal risk, but at the same time, there was risk. And the trouble is, when you give a message out like that, it has the dangerous potential effect of worrying people such that they will reject having AstraZeneca.
Well, no, but hold on a minute. Isn't it better that we do discuss where there are concerns and where there are risks and address them and talk about the actual, the probabilities of different risks of different things, either getting COVID or having the vaccine, and an honest and adult conversation about this stuff rather than, and I do think this was something that a lot of the media were doing in recent years, like, don't raise any concerns, even when, Norway were raising concerns and Germany were raising concerns, poo-pooing everything, and saying, it's not a problem, nothing to see here, because that does make people suspicious.
No, but with respect, that's not my point. I agree we need to discuss all these things, and you shouldn't shut that down. But what they said yesterday really didn't shed any particular light on this. They accept that they don't have absolute proof that there is a connection. They have a suspicion that there may be a connection. But then when they talk about it, they say, which means under 30s should be offered a different jab. That will then suggest in the minds of many people that somehow this is dangerous to people under 30s. It's not dangerous in that regard, because there's far less risk of ever getting these terrible problems from taking this. And there is, say, as people talk about, birth control, crossing the road. In other words, these risks are risks, but they're in an infinitesimal level. So instead of coming out with that at the beginning, they come out with the announcement that they're advising under 30s not to have the jab. And I think, in this present state where, we have enough problem at the moment getting some people to go in and take the jab, this will give them plenty of strength to say, oh, well, there, we told you so. These things are dangerous. They're not. I've been volunteering at my local vaccine station now for the last few weeks. And many people come in feeling very worried about it because they weren't sure what advice to accept, and they need to be calmed and talked to, and they've been brave in coming in. But there are many out there that won't come in, are turning down their invitations for no reason at all, other than people saying, look, you're going to die for this reason or that reason, or you're going to be neutered as a result of it. This doesn't help, and I thought the way in which it was done was really not necessary. In fact, funnily enough, I thought the European Medicines Agency was better by saying that immediately just simply said the benefits outweigh the risks. You are far more likely to die and you're far more likely to get a blood clot as a result of coronavirus than you ever will as a result of any of the vaccines.
Okay. Well, let's talk about another aspect of this, because the whole point of all the vaccines is not just to save lives, it's also to save us from existing rather than living in lockdown. We've got the key lockdown easing happening next Monday, where people are able to go to sit outdoors in a restaurant or a pub or a bar or a cafe. We're allowed to go to inside shops. We're also told, though, that they're going to have these trials later this month of concerts and football matches and the like, using testing, but also looking at the possibility of vaccine passports. So the government has ummed and ahed and said, yes, they will, no, they won't, definitely not, possibly, who knows, for the last few months about vaccine passports. We know it's what Michael Gove, who's the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, is pushing. We know it's what the government has been spending millions of pounds in helping to fund research on. They want to go ahead with vaccine passports. Do you believe that the government will go ahead, that they will get that through Parliament? And do you think they should be able to go ahead with vaccine passports?
Well, I'm not in favour of vaccine passports for domestic use. I can understand that having a stamp in your passport is no great obligation, and if it's what required to go to another country and they require, then doing that, I think, is reasonably straightforward. What's not straightforward is being asked to pull out identity cards, etc., when you enter normal facilities like pubs, restaurants, theatres, etc. And my concern in this is it's fraught with all sorts of complications and possibilities of people wrongly being turned away, being denied access to places that previously was their right to have access. The point I simply make is that I hope the government will think very carefully about this, because if you ask yourself the question, we have gone out on a limb and got more vaccines and have now vaccinated more people and will have vaccinated people across the nation earlier than most other nations. And we've done that for a reason, which is we believe the vaccines work. And all the evidence shows not only do they work in stopping one getting it, or even if you get it, reducing it infinitesimally to a very low level of outbreak, but also we realize now that they stop transmission dramatically. So if we believe all of that, and herd immunity is now because of that, and that is important, then why, I don't understand, are we putting in this extra position that says we're not going to allow anybody in that hasn't had the vaccine? Those few that manage to avoid it or can't do it, the pregnant women, etc., what we do is try and protect them, but we can't shut down elements of society just simply for that. I think we should have more faith in the reality that vaccines, etc., and advanced vaccines are the solution, not make greater restrictions.
And indeed, the people who are still anxious and still concerned and want to keep their risk down to as close to zero as possible can just choose not to go to concerts or football matches or to the pub or restaurants. I mean, that, and sit indoors, that is their choice, but they don't have the right to impose those limitations on other people, do they?
Well, that's my concern. I don't know how you would manage this. I think there are all sorts of practical considerations to be taken on, and instinctively, here is the problem. The wrong lessons may well be being learnt out of this process, which is that governments can and should control more of what we do, more and more of what we do.
But the polling keeps telling us that this is what the public want. Apparently, there are millions of people in this country crying out for a more authoritarian government, telling us what we can and can't do, where we can and can't go, and who we can and can't see.
Well, of course, as I keep saying, you will always get the answer you want when you look at the polling. If you ask people, these are important to restrict death and to stop people passing infections. If you ask that question as it's loaded, you will get an answer back that says, well, of course, I don't want all my family affected to die, and therefore, as this stops that, I will support it. The answer, however, is that this isn't, and this is the critical point, I don't believe this is necessary for that reason. I think this is an extension of authority that isn't necessary. And in a way, we do need, at these particular times, to try and wake everybody up and remind people that we need to guard against over-excessive, zealous government. I mean, we've seen what happens when the tax authorities start reaching into us and saying, do you know what? We didn't quite get that right before, but now because we think that we got it wrong, we're going to reach back over 2 years or more, 3 years, 4 years, and take money out of your account because we should have got this right and you should have known. These are the sort of powers that really affect people, and people will wake up one day and say, oh, I don't agree with that, but it's too late. Yeah. And I think, therefore, it's right for politicians to say, whoa, 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 stop. What are we actually trying to solve? Because this doesn't solve what we say may be the problem. And therefore, it's important for us to get a balance in all of this.
Okay.
The big decisions were made. The vaccine rollout is brilliant. The Prime Minister should take the plaudits for all of that. And I believe we are going to be at the state where this country, with the support of vaccines modified in the future, will be now able to go about its daily lives properly. That we should enshrine and get those freedoms back that we have given away so much in the last year.